Welcome to the Praxology Podcast, where theology fuels the mission of the church. This is a special edition of this podcast, which is a collaboration between Mission College and Josiah Venture. We really do this as an exercise in thinking biblically, reflecting theologically, and acting missionally. And we're so grateful for your input in this discussion. This isn't just us talking, but especially today, we're going to be answering some listener questions. And I'm your host today, Tyler Patty, and I'm here with Landen Lamas. And Sean, our usual co-host, is sick, unfortunately. So get better soon, Sean. And but we're excited to jump into these questions that you guys have prepared for us.
Yeah, it should be fun.
So, Landon, how are you doing this morning?
Doing well. Excited to be back. This is my second time on the podcast, so it's great to be back. And yeah, looking forward to jumping into some questions.
Awesome. This is going to be fun. We're going to be jumping around kind of all over the place, touching on different elements of different podcasts from this season. But as kind of a wrap-around theme, this season we've been talking about kind of your missional toolkit for success. So what things do you need to consider? What tools do you need to acquire or build or cultivate in order to be successful in mission? And again, by mission, we don't just mean that, hey, you're headed to Africa, but God has called you to be a missionary right where you are, in your local city, in your local church, to the people that are around you. And so we all need to be reflecting on how to do that better.
And I love the toolkit picture, because we all can continue to add new tools, and we all can grow and develop. And so as you know, we hear these podcasts, as we think about this, there's more areas to grow, and then we can think about, oh yeah, that would be wonderful for me to grow and develop, to think about. And hopefully as we talk through some of these questions, we'll also get some of that, some maybe new tools for the kit. Hopefully.
Let's see what we can find. So the first question is comes from somebody who's asking a question about Dorca, who was interviewed about her own research that she conducted while she was a student at Mission College. And she did research in her own youth group, in her own church, about their understanding of mission, and found that a lot of people thought of mission mostly as doing something for God, kind of the activity. Here's what I do for you, God. Rather than, which she was kind of proposing, was an idea of doing mission with God, that God is already on mission and he's inviting us to join him. But the question from our listener is, do you think that Western missionaries are to blame for this kind of understanding of mission as action-oriented, as the things that we do? Yeah. So do Europeans think of mission as action because of the influence of Western missionaries? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty big question, isn't it? Pretty broad. But I think for sure you can look at how Europeans or how different people in this part of the world think about mission and wonder, okay, how did they come to that understanding? What influenced them? And I think for sure we could definitely recognize that there have been a lot of Western missionaries from the U.S., from the U.K., that have come to this part of the world and have brought certain values and certain ways of thinking about doing ministry that have influenced Europeans. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
We're both two people who have influence from the West. I'm born in California, and so we definitely live here and influence people here and bring certain values. And we do have to question and evaluate, are those values my culture? Are those values, the mindset of American business principles, or are they actually grounded in scripture and biblical principles?
Absolutely. It's something we all have to reflect on. We all bring our own kind of baggage to this question of what is mission? How do we do mission well? I would say the short answer is to the question is, who knows? It would be a really interesting piece of research that maybe somebody could do. I know one of our former colleagues, Anichka Janoshkova, she actually did her bachelor's thesis on a little bit of this question, on how Western missionaries kind of brought and reconciled their own cultural baggage with the culture that they were engaging with in the Czech Republic. Yeah. So that would be maybe a resource for understanding this, but this would certainly need a little bit more research and more reflection. But when you think about values that Western missionaries might bring, what are some of those values that maybe we could just point to as an example of a value that might make its way into our missional theology?
Yeah. Well, I think for sure one thing is that in the U.S., pragmatism is really important, and we value efficiency. We value measurable goals, achieving, and being able to feel like at the end of the day we came home and we could mark off what we got done, right? And so there's a very strong sense of accomplishment and achievement, and that you could trace that back into America as a country where people came there and wanted to build and wanted to develop, and there was kind of this manifest destiny. And so we have this entrepreneurial, I can do it. If it's to be, it's up to me mentality. And we can bring that into the church and make it seem like, okay, what the church needs to be doing is accomplishing goals and tasks.
Yeah, that's right.
I think that happens a lot.
It does happen. And in a lot of ways, that outside perspective can be helpful to Europeans that are a little more okay with the things taking longer.
Mm-hmm.
I know that, and I know you'll understand and empathize with this. Being in some church meetings can be painful sometimes, where you're sitting with other fellow leaders and you just kind of talk around the issues, and it takes a long time to even really get to somewhere. And some of our Western pragmatism comes in there, and we're like, can we just figure out what needs to be done, divide up the tasks, and then just go and do it?
Yes.
Yeah. How do you feel in those situations?
It definitely brings up some memories and emotions as you share those. Yeah. Sitting in meetings for sure, and thinking about how we structure those. And my mentality coming from the U.S. is we need to have an agenda, we need to have an outline, we need to have topics we're going to discuss, and we need to get through them efficiently. And that's not always the best way to have meetings. And there are times where we need to have space just to talk and to create more of that trust and safety. So there does have to be some give and take, but I think there can be benefits from us influencing the way meetings are done, and also us learning to not be so driven just by tasks.
Mm-hmm.
Because it does show up then, right, in the next step of mission, where we can turn life with God into it's a bunch of to-dos, so that we can show we've accomplished something for God. And that turns into an unhealthy way of living out the Christian life.
Yeah. And we talked before we started push to record that this is kind of a temptation for Christians generally. It's not just a temptation for those who grew up in Western culture to see life as a task accomplishing exercise.
Right.
But we can all view our relationship with God like that. It's a great temptation to see to think like, oh, I'm going to do these things for God, and then He's going to be happy with me.
Yeah.
So what's the remedy for that sort of an approach?
Right. Well, I think we want to always go back to Scripture. We always want to go back to looking at what Christ modeled in the New Testament. And, He says the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And so I think we see there it's a comprehensive nature of following God. And it's not just love God with Monday through Friday, or it's not just love God with, getting certain things done and your body and your actions, but it's your heart, it's your mind, it's your full being. And mission is part of what you do as a Christian. It's not something you do in the summer when you go for 2 weeks to some location. So I think that passage, right, that has to inform us. We're also talking about, Paul, similar things. We see Paul in Colossians say, like, whatever you do it with all of your heart as unto the Lord, not for men. And so there is a sense of like God wants to include all aspects of our lives into following Him. What would you add to that?
I would just agree. I think that's a really great picture, and the picture that you're painting is European missional strategies are better, or Western missionary strategies are better, but no matter where you're coming from, we need to see mission as it's something that involves all of who we are, that includes things like our emotions and expressing love and loyalty to God, and also being faithful, but also doing things and putting our faith into action. So it's a holistic thing. I think that's a great vision.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, moving on to the next question, on authority. So Landon, you were last on the podcast talking about this question of authority and what is its role when we think about teams, when we think about the local church. So the question is, what about authority more broadly within ecclesiology, our theology of the church, how do we think about authority in different church traditions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think this is a really important topic, and it's one that I'm focusing on in my research, actually. So I have been thinking about this quite a bit lately. And the more you dive into this question of authority, you realize it really does start to touch into so many different areas of life as we ask, okay, where does authority come from? Who has authority to do what, and how do you exercise that authority? And so in the context of the church, the question is, what has God authorized the church to do and to be in the world? And I would summarize very simply as to say, we are to go into the world and say, Jesus is King. That's our message to the world, is Jesus is King. And he's authorized us to do that and to say that and to proclaim that. But then the ecclesiology question, which was asked here, is, okay, so how does authority work in the church, right? And who should be doing what, and who's authorized to have certain authorities in different areas? And there is debate. It's not 100% agreement within even the Protestant tradition, let alone if you bring in the Catholic or the Eastern Orthodox traditions. There's a lot of debate over these questions and wrestling through how we understand some of those key texts, like Matthew 16, where Jesus says to Peter, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and I will give you the keys of the kingdom. And what you loose on earth will be loose in heaven. What you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. And so that passage is a really crucial one. And then the Matthew 18, where we have church discipline, where God says, or Jesus says, if someone sins against you, go to your brother and confront him. And if he doesn't listen, bring another witness or two. And then if they don't, bring them to the church. And so there are some places where we see him authorizing believers to exercise authority. So those are some, I think, key passages to just get us started on. But then we could also talk about different church traditions.
Yeah.
So you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So, and I'm just reflecting back things that you told me, because you're doing this research. But there are kind of three different models of church authority depending on your tradition. So there's the hierarchical model of authority that basically says that authority has been given first to the elders, could be pastors or priests, depending on your tradition, and then it is through them distributed to the congregation, to the people of God.
Right. So that'd be like an Episcopalian would hold to that, a Catholic tradition would hold to that, whereas a much hierarchical structure.
Yep. So, and then the next one is the elder-led or Presbyterian structure, which maybe you can explain a little bit more since you're familiar with.
Yeah. So there's still like a synod that's over it. You still have a presbytery, but you have more delegated authority within the church, and you have within each congregation elders that lead, but then have responsibility to their local presbytery. And so you have a little bit more of a delegated structure, but still there's a hierarchy. And then the final one is congregationalism.
Yes.
And basically that argues that each congregation is its own autonomous church, and that its final authority is to God and to no other governing body. So there's no authority over a congregational church outside of its local elders and pastor. Yeah.
So what's a common practice you'll see in congregational churches is that members vote on important decisions. So it's not that the leaders make the decisions.
Yep.
They might bring forth a couple options, but it's the church as a whole that actually votes and decides this is what we're going to do.
And in the hierarchical structures, there still is issues where members will have vote and have some say, but it's definitely not as common or not on as many issues as you will in a congregational setting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I would suspect that our listeners might find themselves in lots of different places in these traditions. So one of the things that's hard and also is good for us to reflect on is that there's not one, like, this is the structure, this is the biblical structure. These are all structures that are trying to wrestle with different parts of the Bible and reflect theologically and try to put that into practice.
Right.
But there are some important questions about authority that each of these traditions needs to consider. Right. What are some of those questions?
Yeah, so I think every church has to determine how they're going to structure themselves, and if you're in a denomination or if you're in a larger congregation, then you have certain rules that govern that. But at the end of the day, in your local church, one of the questions that affects your normal day-to-day life is who makes the decisions around here? How does it work? And if we need to, change the carpet, how does that get decided? Or if we're going to choose a new teaching series, or a more sensitive topic, if someone is living in a sinful behavior, and they're a member in our church. What do we do, and who addresses that? And so, yeah, there are questions about what authority has been given to the elders, because that's, in Scripture we kind of have, you have elder, or you could say elder and pastor, synonymous. Bishop, question of where that would fit. And then you have members. And so as you think through those levels of authority, what are the elders to be doing? How are they to be structuring themselves? And then how are they to lead the congregation and the members?
Yep. So the real question, even if we think about Paul in like Ephesians exhorting the leaders, is he wants them to equip the saints. And so a big question is how do leaders, and no matter what context you're in, how do they equip others with the authority that's been given to them? So so you already mentioned kind of what authority has been given to everybody. But can you kind of paint that picture a little bit more?
Yeah. I think one of the things you look at when you look at these different structures or the ways that churches organize themselves is to ask that question, what role do the members play? And the more hierarchical your structure is, oftentimes there's less authority that is given to the members. And the more congregational, or the more you have it within an autonomous individual church, then there's more opportunity for the members to have more of a role. But one of the big things is, do the members have the ability, and are they being trained and equipped to live out the gospel and to practice the things that the church is supposed to do? And one of those things being church discipline, and addressing, within the church, are we believing the right faith, and are we living it out in right conduct? And so I think the elders are the ones who should be guiding the church and understanding, what do we believe? They should be the ones who are trained and equipped to know the doctrines and hold to them and to teach them to the church. But they should also then be teaching the members of the church how they are to exercise and use their gifts. And I think that's a huge piece, is the equipping of the church, equipping of the members. I know that's something we're passionate about. Formation, we talk a lot about. But yeah, the scriptures teach that the body, there are many different gifts. And 1 Corinthians 12, when all of them are exercising those gifts properly, the body most effectively works. And I think that's a helpful metaphor for us to think about.
Absolutely. So this goes into our next question really nicely. I, in a previous podcast, talked about the sin of omission, sinning by not doing something. So when we think about a ministry team, so I'm sure some of our listeners are either on ministry teams or are maybe leading a ministry team, maybe a youth group team or a evangelistic outreach team, or maybe even pastoring a church. What are some ways that a ministry team could sin by omission?
Yes.
Especially related to this question of authority.
What does the word omission mean? We got to clarify that.
So omission, omitting something, so not doing something. So we think of sin a lot as the big English word is commission. So actively doing something, so I sin by doing something, but sometimes we can sin by not doing something as well that God is calling us to do. So you already kind of touched on one of these things. Maybe one of the ways that we could sin by omission is by not practicing church discipline. I know that for me, that's a very uncomfortable thing to step into. I think, Landon, you're a lot better at this naturally than I am, or maybe just more brave. But stepping in and calling out sin and having the hard conversations takes a lot out of me. What's your experience in those kind of situations?
Yeah, right. So the listener is asking, right, the question is how do ministry teams fall into that area of omission, not doing what they should do? And I think you're right. Obviously, one area is having to apply and live out church discipline, and it is not fun. And most people want to avoid it like the plague. And I will say myself, I'm not someone who naturally enjoys conflict, but I have learned over the years, and by teaching a course and taking a course on conflict and pursuing peace and dealing with change management, that you have to deal with conflict and you have to learn how to do it well. And when you do press into conflict, it actually gives you an opportunity for growth and for deepening relationship and for helping that person become healthier. So actually avoiding someone who's living in sin is actually hurtful and detrimental to them. Even though there's the fear of possibly losing the relationship, having them get angry or so on. In the long term, it's like the doctor that does the painful operation. No one, isn't going to enjoy the operation itself, but the long-term result is much more health.
Yes.
And so we even, had a situation like this where we had some students in our ministry that we had to address an issue, and it was not fun. And it wasn't easy to have them over to our house and have to ask them some hard questions. But in doing that, they actually have come to appreciate us and trust us more. And one of the things that we did with them was we just opened the scripture and says, what does the Bible teach about this? And how are we living that out? And how are you guys not living that out? And we have to talk about that. So I do think it is really important that we don't neglect calling out sin when it gets to that point where it's needed. And of course, everyone who hears this, we do need to say it is sensitive. There's not a clear-cut path to that. It's not a easy formula that you can just follow. Here's 3 steps, and every time this is how you should do it. But it's clearly taught, Matthew 18, and the church is healthier when they're willing to address and confront sin, so that the health of their body remains strong. Yes.
Another image that came to mind is like a when something gets stuck under your skin, like what's that called?
A sliver, in your finger.
Yeah, like a thorn or a piece of wood. Like if it gets stuck under your finger or under your hand or something like that. When that happens to my 6-year-old son, he it doesn't bother him actually that much. But when I say, hey, Asher, we need to get that out, then he goes ballistic.
Yes.
He goes crazy because he knows that I'm going to have to actually take a needle and kind of break open the skin, cause a little bit of pain to be able to pull it out. But if we don't do that, then it's only going to get worse. It's going to get infected. It's going to get much more painful and cause additional problems. Yeah. So I think what often keeps us, there are a couple things that probably keep us from practicing church discipline. Certainly that it's uncomfortable. Maybe we don't want to add more problems. We're like, I already have enough problems as it is. If I bring this up, it's going to cause more pain. Yeah. But one that I think is particularly felt by Europeans, especially in churches that maybe are smaller or where you have a small ministry team, is, if I call this person out and they don't respond well, they might decide to leave, and then I'll lose them and won't have a key member of my team or my congregation. But what would you say to somebody who's thinking those thoughts, who's worried about losing someone? Yeah,
I mean, I would first say I recognize that fear, and I don't want to lose people in my team. And our teams are small. At times, we are searching for people, and we need people, and so the idea of losing a key person is scary, no doubt about it. But I think I would just come back to that whole principle of, number one, being faithful to what we're called to as Christians. And we see this clearly called and addressed multiple times in Scripture. But secondly, it's the doing what's right that leads to long-term health. And so if you allow someone to stay on your team who's living clearly in sin and is continuing to model that, everyone else on the team will see it. They will know. Sooner or later, it will come out. And then it starts to show them, oh, they're a key leader and they can live like that and they can engage in that behavior and no one's going to call them out. So what does that mean for me? And so it can just create a really unhealthy precedent and pattern. And so while it is painful and while it is very possible that the person may leave, I think not only do we stand on solid ground biblically, but for the long-term health of the ministry, addressing that and telling the person in the meeting, I'm doing this out of love. Yeah. I don't want you to leave the church. I want you to come back to the Lord and live healthier and not have this in your life. But I do think we have to press into that fear and trust Lord. Ultimately, it's an act of trust, an act of faith.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Have you experienced that on some of your teams, or how has that been for you in dealing with confronting someone who's in situation is not good for them? Yeah, my
natural tendency is to kind of hope that things solve themselves.
Yes,
but that rarely works. It usually causes more problems.
Ignoring it doesn't solve it.
Ignoring it does not solve it, and it does not go away. Yeah. So I am learning. My conflict style is avoidance. Yeah. My natural one. But I personally have been blessed by people in my life who have come and said, "Hey, actually, I believe God has something better for you, and this is hurting you, and it's hurting your relationship with Him, and it's impacting those around you. So let's talk about it, and let's look at Scripture, and let's reflect on some ways forward, and painting that vision. Some advice that I got when dealing with some really difficult conflict in a church setting one time was that it can be helpful to paint a picture of two paths.
Yeah.
Like if you keep going on down this road, where is that going to lead? And helping them reflect on that. Where is this leading them? Or what if we made this choice? Where would that lead? And helping them again kind of understand how their choices are affecting them, but ultimately cast a vision for health, for reconciliation, for wholeness, for fruitfulness as well.
Right.
So we did that with one leader a number of years ago, and it was hard, but in the long run, it was really, really good.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And I know I want to just encourage listeners, you're maybe dealing with this and thinking about this and considering, do I press into this, that there are stories where people respond really well. And it does lead to health. And I remember I worked with a lady who she got church disciplined, and it was really jarring to her. And yet she says that was actually a crucial moment in her walk with God, was when the elders came to her and addressed the sin. And she at first didn't want to hear it, but ultimately she responded and changed and came back to the church. And she said it was actually one of the most significant things that God had done in her life. And she was extremely thankful that the elders of the church did discipline her.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
That's really encouraging. All for the health of the whole body. That's what we're after. That's what Jesus is after as well. Okay, we're gonna pause this really good and also hard but really good discussion about authority, church discipline with a lightning round.
Okay.
So this is the segment of the podcast where we ask some fun questions to hopefully stimulate some interesting answers.
All right.
So you've not seen these in advance, and I'm going to ask you, Landen, 3 questions.
All right.
First question, respond with the first thought that comes to mind.
Okay.
Would you rather have the ability to time travel to the past or to the future?
Oh man, past or future? Well, I would say the future from a investing standpoint. No, but I would say probably the past for sure. I think it'd be fascinating to be able to go back and experience certain moments and meet certain people. Yeah, that'd be pretty awesome.
For sure. I suspected you would say that based on what I know about you.
Right.
So yeah, I would love to go to the past as well, just because as like a cross-cultural experience.
Yes.
We often think of ourselves in the future as like, oh, we're so much farther along than those who were, lived a couple hundred years before. But being able to step back into time, understand why people are doing the things they're doing, living the way they are, would be really fascinating and enriching, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, if you could go back to like certain key moments in history and just observe or participate in that, that'd be pretty awesome.
It'd be pretty cool. Okay, next question. Landen, could you share a funny or embarrassing childhood memory that still makes you laugh today?
Okay. Childhood memory. I'll tell you one that it's about me and my brother, and that's just a fun one. But it is embarrassing on my side. So I had an older brother, and he was very active and loved sports and gymnastics and trampoline and all that stuff. And so we actually have this video, and it was him, and he was learning how to like stand on the edge of like our little kid table, put his hands on the ground and flip over.
Oh.
So he was very acrobatic and he could do all these cool things. And so he would like, kind of like a gymnast, put his hands down and then flip his feet over and land on his feet and whoa. And I was like seeing him do that and I was like, oh, I got this.
Oh yeah.
I'm good. So I get up on there and I'm on my back and I'm like going to the edge and I don't even get to like get my hands on the ground and I just lean too far and my body weight just takes me. I just end up like landing on my head and my shoulders and falling over and just start bawling.
Oh.
And my dad recorded the whole thing.
Fantastic.
And I think I have many stories of that, like me trying to follow after my older brother doing what he was doing and, getting hurt.
That's great, especially that you caught it. He caught it on video.
It was on video.
That's great.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thanks for sharing that. Last question. Whenever we get together as a whole team, I usually call on you to put together some sort of team building exercise, because you're really good at thinking about what's an activity that we could do that would really unite us as a team.
Yeah.
What is a favorite exercise that you've used in the past that maybe someone should try with their own ministry team, one of our listeners?
That's great. So one that comes to my mind that we did at one of our team building events that I thought was great, and I would encourage people to do if you haven't done this, is to give space to let everyone share their testimony. So I think that's a great thing to do, because you work together, but you actually sometimes assume you know a lot of things about their spiritual history. And when you give them space to find out or to share, you end up learning a lot more. And so I think that was really beneficial, and I think that could be something that's helpful to do on teams for team building. And then also doing fun activities where you see sides of people that you don't normally see in your normal work environment. So we did an escape room where we had all these different tasks in this high pressure environment in this room.
It was high pressure.
And everyone had to run around and try and solve stuff. And it was our core team all working together. And you had your wife and Sean had his wife. And it was just fun, all of us trying to figure this out together. And then the end, we ended up falling into line as our team works. You were like at the head of the spaceship directing each one of us what to do, and we solved it and we got out. But it definitely brought out just fun sides of our personalities that we didn't normally see.
It did. It really did. That was a really fun experience. Us figuring out, okay, in this environment, how do we react? How do we work as a team?
Yep.
We've got it kind of figured out with the college, but not with the spaceship.
That's right. That's right.
That's awesome. Okay, well let's go back to our regularly scheduled programming.
All right,
and end with final two questions.
Yeah. So
our fourth question from our listener is related to the episode where we interviewed Killian, our teammate and graduate of Formation College, who shared about his own dissertation as well on the relationship between structured and prophetic leadership, or we could say kind of fixed and flexible leadership.
Yeah.
So the question is, how should we think about flexible leadership in the context of a church or a denomination that doesn't like change?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How do we think about leading in flexible ways or leading change in an environment where that's really difficult?
Yeah. Well, we teach a course here at Formation called Change Management and Conflict Resolution.
Yes.
And so we talk a lot about leading change. And so that's the first thought that just comes to my mind is some of those principles from leading change. And the fact that oftentimes churches fear change because they're afraid of what's going to be taken away from them. And that you're gonna change the system, and I'm not gonna like the new thing, and you're gonna take something away from me that I did like. And so, I think oftentimes in this type of setting, if you have a more structured leadership and the church does things certain ways and they're used to doing those the way and they don't want to change, you do face a pretty big task to try and come in and say, I want to do things differently. But I do think that it's possible, and there are certain things that you can do to help lead change. And I think many times churches do need to be changing and growing and listening to other members and not just allowing things to go the way they have been just because that's how they've always done it. But I would start by asking lots of questions, trying to understand the why of why the church does things the way they do. Listening is a key part because that helps you gain trust. And then as you start to try and say, hey, I think these are some of the changes or these are some of the things that I'd like to see done, learning how to communicate in a way that still honors the past so that the people feel appreciated and understood, but you're able to share the why of why you think these changes need to help. Yeah. So I would start listening, asking good questions to understand why they do things the way they do first.
Yes. I have a great example of this. When I first started serving as a missionary here in the Czech Republic 6 years ago, I led a group of Czech interns who were all serving in their local churches and supporting them, giving some training to them. And one of our guy students was working in a very traditional church in the mountains of the Czech Republic. So like nice. Village life, like they're very much have their routine, have their ways. Yeah. And he was getting really frustrated. Like, I want to bring change. I want us to be more outreach oriented. I want to, want to see more young people taking up responsibilities. And he was getting really frustrated, which is a very common response from younger people to older people, or if you're more flexible than in a fixed and structured environment. So we landed on he had to do like a little research project at the end of his internship, and we landed on exactly what you said. How about you do some listening and go talk to the older members of the church and hear why did they set up the church like this to begin with? And he discovered that a lot of the things that he was hoping for, like vision and empowering the next generation and fresh ideas and contextualization, they were totally on board with because they did that back in the day
when they started
they started the church.
Yes.
And so they had that same vision as well. But they were so invested in that vision that it was hard for them to see some things change, because it not only meant like a loss of the way things are, but also a loss in a sense of all the hard work that they had put into the church. Right. And so, but it was only through this process of listening and understanding and hearing their story that then he was able to, in a more informed way, propose some changes. And like, okay, and even find an area of common ground. Like you do care about these things. I care about them too. How do we move forward?
Right.
So
and I think when you go and sit and listen to your elders, there's so much you will learn. Yeah. And especially if you're younger and you're pumped up about what you want to do and you've got new ideas and you're excited and you've maybe been to a conference, it's easy to come back just really excited to want to implement all these changes and think that they should just be embraced right away. But there is something wise about being forced to allow the elders to hear, to listen to their questions, to talk through it with them, and to understand where they're coming from, because we can oftentimes assume the worst. Yeah. They don't want to change because they're just traditional. They don't want to change because they're not missional. They don't want to change because you fill in the negative, descriptor. But there's actually a lot of faithfulness that can be found in these men and people who have been leading the church and serving the church for a long time, and we have to value that and listen to it. Yes. Yeah. We need to honor the past and also trust that God wants to pass the baton on to us and on to others as well. So we do need to be fostering a culture that thinks about empowering the next generation. And one resource, because I know we're just kind of touching the surface here, but if this is something that someone really wants to dive deeper into, there's a great book called Leading Congregational Change. And in there, they walk through some of the typical change management principles that John Cotter and others have identified, but they think about it within a church context. And how do you incorporate the spiritual element and prepare the heart of the congregation for change before you implement it, and so on. That's be a really helpful resource. That's great. Thanks, Landen. There's more that we could say, but that's a great start. Okay, final question. This is going back to our New Year's episode, which was a couple weeks ago. As a New Year's theme, we settled on embracing limitations, which was a great discussion. Yeah. The question is, can you talk more about what this might look like for somebody whose ministry involves both administrative tasks and disciple making? Mm-hmm. So they have some things that they need to do behind the scenes, and they also want to be involved in the personal lives of people. How do we embrace limits in that sort of a situation? Yeah, I think the concept of limitations is really profound because we are humans. We are finite beings with limited energy, limited time, and so on. And if we don't recognize that God has created us this way and that it is for his good and for his glory that he's made us limited, and for our good that he's made us in this way, we will constantly fight against it. Yes. And we won't be willing to embrace the fact that we are finite. And so I think a key part is, number one, just understanding we are limited. We have to just say that. I know myself. I sometimes don't think I'm limitless. I'm so capable. I can do whatever I want. Anything I set my mind to. And then of course, like a weekend, I'm like, oh, I'm so overwhelmed. I committed to way too much. But so one thing is just learning to embrace the limitations that you naturally have. The second is prioritizing. So because of our limitations, we have to choose very carefully what are the things we commit to. And I like that picture of the glass container, and you have to put in the big rocks first. And so what are the priorities in your life? Even if you're in an administrative role, but you have a lot of responsibility in the office, you have to help get things done and so on. you have the choice to say, what are my priorities this week? And for me, it always starts with family, starts with my time with the Lord. These are the rocks that have to get in. And then you always find space around those ones. Once they're in, there's always extra room, and you can always put some sand around that. So you can find time to do more emails or to fill out this document, or you get this form done, or fill in an Excel spreadsheet or whatnot. But you've got to prioritize. I think that's a crucial piece.
Yeah, that analogy is really helpful. There's some great videos on YouTube that illustrate this, where like you have a jar and you've got rocks and sand, like different sizes. And if you try to put all the little stuff in first and then try to fit the big stuff, it doesn't fit.
The big stuff never gets in if it's filled up with all the, what I would say, like the urgent things. The sand goes in first. You don't get the big rocks in, the priorities. Yeah.
So the theory is, put the priorities, the big rocks in first, and then fill it in with the sand, with the smaller details.
Right.
So for somebody who has administrative responsibilities and wants to be involved in ministry, thinking, what are those really important things? Those might not always be the most urgent, I don't know. What's an example of important or urgent?
You have to fill in, your taxes. Those are due by the certain time of the year, right? Or you have to submit quarterly reports.
Yes.
And you have certain reporting that has to get done, and people are submitting applications for visas. All these sorts of things that we're so thankful for the administrative people who do those behind the scenes work. But you have to be careful, because there's always going to be urgent things. There's always going to be more emails, more forms, more quarterly reports, more taxes and deadlines. And so if you're being controlled by those urgent things, then the important things will just naturally get pushed out.
Yeah. So this is probably applicable no matter what our kind of ministry responsibilities are, but particularly if somebody's trying to balance these really important behind the scenes things and still be active in disciple making.
Right.
So,
which is a great desire.
Yeah.
But you do have to be careful, because if you keep adding too many things, you'll get overwhelmed.
You will. You when we were talking through this and beforehand, you had a great illustration.
Yes.
We'll finish your illustration for like how far we might have to go in embracing our limitations.
Yes.
Can you paint that picture for us?
So this semester, I have realized, just with the PhD studies that I'm doing and the commitments to this for mission, that I really had to cut out a lot of other things to get that done. And I was recently watching a World War II movie where it was these planes, these bombers that were they're flying over Germany to drop these bombs to try and stop Hitler from conquering Europe. And one of the planes gets an engine shot down from another plane, and so they're trying to fly back to England, and they're running out of fuel, they're running out of energy. And so basically what he says to his crew is, anything that's not bolted down, throw it out the window. Like, everything's got to go so that this plane is as light as possible so that we make it back. And I have felt kind of like my responsibilities has been a little bit like that. I've basically had to say no and get everything off of the plane, or get everything off of my responsibility plate that's not essential, because I just don't have the capacity to do more with the current commitments I already have. And so there are times where you have to look at your life and go, okay, we got to get ruthless about this.
Yes.
And we really have to start cutting things out. And so if you are in that place where you're overcommitted and you have too much and you feel like you're approaching burnout, it might be a good discipline to say, okay, if it's not bolted down, if I haven't given a full commitment, I have to do this, you may need to throw it out the window and do less, and be pretty extreme about it.
Because what's important is getting the people and the plane back.
Do you remember the name of that book by John Mark Comer?
I was just thinking of it as well.
What is it called?
Yes, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry.
Yes.
That totally came to mind as you used that word. So because he argues that, or he borrows an idea from another author, I think Dallas Willard, who says that the greatest enemy to our spirituality is hurry. Is being overwhelmed by all these urgent things and feeling like we're just running 1,000 miles an hour. Yeah. So the title of John Mark Comer's book is The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. We need to ruthlessly eliminate that sort of slavery to the urgent in order to cultivate a deeper relationship with God. And that also applies for ministry as well.
Yeah.
So, well, this has been fun, Landon.
Yeah.
And thank you to our listeners for joining us for this really special Q&A episode. We really appreciate your part in this conversation. We want to be, we want to all be thinking more deeply about what it means to live on mission, especially in the Central and Eastern European environment.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, and thank you guys for your questions. It's been fun getting to talk through them today.
It's been great. So we will have one more question at the end of this season. It's probably in May or June, so keep your questions coming. But until next time, blessings, and we will see you soon.